Funny how some of the most comforting songs, the ones we all turn to when things get tough, they often come from the absolute deepest places of pain? It's this wild paradox, right? This idea that a personal crisis, a private storm, can somehow become this source of universal comfort. It really makes you wonder.
What if those moments that feel like they're about to break us are actually the very moments that forge something beautiful, something that lasts? That's the question we're going to dig into today. We're going to uncover the incredible stories of three people who stared into the abyss of their own despair and somehow, from that darkness, created a light that has guided millions ever since.
So let's start with our first story. It's about a man who, at the very end of his life, was absolutely convinced he had nothing to show for it, just buried in this profound sense of failure. So this is Reverend Henry Francis Light. He's at the end of his career, and as he looks back on his life's work, all he can see is just disappointment. His whole inner world is just this bleak landscape of regret. Imagine it. He pours his heart out every single week, but the church, it's half empty. The people he's dedicated his entire life to serving, they just seem completely indifferent. And he looks out at his community and sees all the greed, the fighting, the petty jealousies, and he just knows his message isn't getting through. It's not landing. And in his mind, that means he's failed them. And he's failed God. And that's the thought that just haunts him his whole life. Poured out. And for what? It's a total crisis of purpose. I mean, that would crush just about anyone. And then, as if that weren't enough, comes the final blow. On top of all this spiritual despair, his doctor tells him he's terminally ill. He only has months to live, so the end is near, and he's convinced it's going to be a completely empty one. So in this moment of just utter darkness, he's sitting in his study, and he's just kind of flipping through his old, well-worn Bible, and it falls open to this passage from the Gospel of Luke. Abide with us. It's so simple. It just means stay with us. A plea for company as the night closes in. And right then, something just clicks. That ancient plea becomes his own personal one. The words just start pouring out of him. And in less than an hour, his private prayer becomes the first verse of the hymn we now know as Abide with Me. He literally transformed his cry for help into a song for the ages. In this one line, wow, it just shows the transformation perfectly. Here's a man facing his own death, a man who felt like a total failure. And he writes this line of pure defiance, a pure triumph. His darkest moment didn't end him. No, it produced a light that has gone on to comfort millions.
Okay, so Light found his inspiration at the end of his life, right? In the quiet of his study. Our next story couldn't be more different. It comes from a whole other kind of isolation. A boat, just stuck in the middle of the sea, with a young man whose faith is just as stalled. So this is John Henry Newman. He's a young clergyman, and he's on his way back to England after what can only be described as a disastrous trip to Italy. He's physically just shattered from a near-fatal illness, and spiritually, he's completely lost at sea, questioning literally everything he's ever believed in. And I mean, his trip was relentless. It wasn't just one bad thing. It was like a cascade of disasters. He got injured, there were storms, an earthquake, and then an epidemic that almost killed him. And while he was delirious with fever, he became totally convinced that his faith was a sham, just hollow to the core. But then, as he's just sitting there, stuck on this motionless ship, a new thought starts to creep in. He survived. People all around him were dying, but he made it. Why? And for the first time, he starts to see a pattern, maybe even a purpose. He starts to think, maybe it wasn't just luck. Maybe he was saved by providence, for a reason. And out of that little spark of hope comes another prayer, which becomes another famous hymn. I mean, he is literally in the dark, on a boat, far from home. But he's also talking about his soul, right? He's just asking for a little bit of guidance, not some grand vision for the future, just a little light to see the next step. And this is where he finds his peace. He just lets go of needing to have all the answers. He accepts the darkness he's in and simply asks for enough light for one single step. It's this incredibly powerful prayer of humility, born right out of all that torment and doubt. So Newman's crisis was all about trying to find his path forward. Our last story today is about a woman whose path was just cut short, abruptly. It's a story about what happens when you finally achieve your dream, only to have it cruelly snatched away. Her name was Sarah Flower Adams, and she had one big dream, to be a great actress. And you know what? She did it. She had this huge triumph playing Lady Macbeth. But right then, just as her career was about to explode, a sudden illness struck. It forced her off the stage forever and left her an invalid. I mean, can you imagine a more bitter disappointment?
So for years, she just wrestled with this loss. But then one day, her minister suggests she read the story of Jacob's ladder from the Bible. The one where he dreams of a ladder going up to heaven while he's sleeping on a stone. And all of a sudden, she has this breakthrough. She starts to see her own stony griefs, her illness, her pain, her lost dream, not as something holding her down, but as the actual steps of a ladder, lifting her closer to God.
And that shift in perspective is everything. She completely reframes her tragedy. The cross that she has to bear isn't just weighing her down anymore. She realizes it's actually raising her up. Her greatest pain becomes the source of her greatest inspiration. And from it, she writes the hymn, Nearer, My God, to Thee.
So think about it. You've got these three different people in their own moments of absolute crisis, and each one of them created something that would just ripple through history, offering strength to countless other people in their darkest hours.
And the legacy is it's staggering. I mean, really think about these moments. You have Nurse Edith Cavell whispering, Abide with me, moments before facing a firing squad. You have the band on the Titanic famously playing Nearer My God to Thee as the ship sank into the ice-cold ocean. And then there's Lead Kindly Light. It was a favorite hymn of both Franklin D. Roosevelt and Mahatma Gandhi. How incredible is that? Two totally different world leaders finding strength in the very same words that came from one man's lonely crisis at sea.
You know, there's this quote from Francis de Sales that I think just perfectly captures what we're talking about here. The writers of these hymns, they weren't shielded from suffering, not at all, but they were given the strength to bear it. And in doing that, they created a way to share that strength with the rest of us. So it really leaves us with this one final thought, doesn't it? Light, Newman, Adams, they each took their deepest despair and transformed it into art that has lasted for centuries. And it just makes you wonder, as you and I face our own trials, whether they're big or small, what unexpected light, what quiet beauty